A step to immortality. He was just under 30 when he passed away, a brilliant scientist, army officer, reconnaissance-man and literature figure, the 10th of April 1865, Altyn-Emel, Kochen-Togan tract. Tezek village once stood on this place. There used to be a cemetery here, called Tore, because only a privileged class, Tore, was buried here, and Chokan Valikhanov belonged to this class. Are there any descriptions of funerals and how it went? This is an unfruitful question. There aren't any descriptions of funerals, nor are there any reminiscences about the last days of Chokan Chingizovich, but there is a legend relating to the mid-20th century. By then his tomb had been lost in the sands of Altyn-Emel, and presumably a local resident decided to make a handmill from the tombstone. He wanted to split it apart. When he started chopping, his eye caught a splinter of the stone. On the same day, he went back home and fell ill. The following day, he died. Initially, a mazar was built over the tombstone. The mazar was erected based on a picture drawn by Grigory Potanin, but the mausoleum was soon destroyed, and in 1881, with some help from Valikhanov's friends, a memorial stone was set up. This memorial was put up by General Governor Kolpakovsky to commemorate research achievements of Valikhanov. This memorial is the copy made at our time. It's authentic and it still bears traces of vandalism. They're being stored in the museum a few kilometers from here. But is this an authentic grave of Chokan Valikhanov? Who was buried here? Chapter 1. Death of Intelligence Officer. Chokan's last day of life is perhaps the most mysterious. He wanted to be a Russian consul in Kashgar, but efforts to open up a trading post proved futile. Valikhanov was disappointed. All along he had been trying to arrive in St. Petersburg, and he kept writing about this to Dostoevsky. In spring of 1864 he participated in a military operation against the Khanate of Kokand, led by Colonel Chernyaev. The operation was known as the Siege of Auliata, which is now known as Taraz. I admit that I'm traveling to get a rank. I think that Chernyaev is a good person and will not spare rank, Chokan wrote. He had to accompany his detachment. Valikhanov had to reach mutual understanding with the locals, but according to the commonly accepted version of events, Chernyaev handled without gloves and simply shot down the entire city and reported the killing of 307 people, mainly from the opposite camp. The Tsarist administration had some definite tasks to tap into this area and crush influence points of Bukhara and Kokand. And like any military person, he followed military assignments. Artillery and bombardment went forward, then the fortresses were destroyed, and so were soldiers. As a result, a lot of civilians died. According to data provided by Potanin, Valikhanov had an unpleasant conversation with Chernyaev and defiantly left the troops to which he was posted. Valikhanov was an element of this system. He didn't have a right to resist. At best, he could just back out and hand in his resignation. After that, Valikhanov arrived to Verny fortress. It is known that he had communicated with Kolpakovsky, who was leading the Semipalatinsk region troops. And then he went to Altyn-Emel, to Tezek village. There, all of a sudden, as the quote goes, he married a charmless but clever sister of Tezek, Aysara. And a few months later he passed away, presumably from old disease of tuberculosis. In the last letter to his father he wrote that he had been ill and had been dying, and asked him to take his wife to his homeland.
Забрать его жену к нему на родину.
Ill health from childhood that grew ever worse since the Kashgar expedition and was permanently damaged in St. Petersburg, this is the commonly accepted version of death of the famous intelligence officer. The version was there, and it was said that he contracted the disease from grandmother Ayganim. If he contracted the disease from Ayganim, then how had he managed to pass the medical commission's examination at the Cadet Corps, and then went to Kashgar, and when he worked in St. Petersburg, he didn't get any medical appointments? Why Chernyaev took him away as an officer and illness records are not there? Why on earth the Khan's sons hadn't been registered anywhere, at least in passing, which said he'd had a serious disease?
Ханской отпрыск вдруг нигде бы не зафиксировалось, что он хотя бы где-нибудь как мимоходом болел бы какой-то там серьезной болезнью.
Some say he died not from tuberculosis, but that he'd been poisoned, and that the death was mysterious, involving a lookalike. His last 2 years of life remain unclear too. You won't find any explanations. In fact, we now have a lot more questions than answers about these blank spots. Chapter 2. Double Life. He died in an absolutely different place and at an absolutely different time. Presumably, there is a secret document which might turn all our ideas about Valikhanov's life upside down. There is some document which bears Valikhanov's signature and is dated 2 years after his death. I don't know, I don't intend to act as a rumor monger, but in any case this view was voiced before. I haven't seen the document, so I can't say anything about this. Now is an attempt to put everything to light. China, Gulja city. Judge it yourselves. These are just facts. In 1864, Chokan Valikhanov and Chernyaev headed out to a campaign, a military operation to capture Pishpek and Auliata. These cities were seized, but the operation wasn't complete, and Chokan Valikhanov expressed discontent with this, as it officially written in his biography, and left the detachment of Chernyaev, who was his senior boss.
Черняев – это его вышестоящее руководство.
There weren't any tribunals, discharge from office or disciplinary reprimands.
At
the same time, there was a riot in Kulja. Interestingly, in 1965, the newspaper Ruski Invalid, the Russian disabled person, carried an article by Chokan Valikhanov about the Dungan riot in Kulja city. And there was other food for thought. Valikhanov's death date was shown to be 1865. All this gives ground to some historians to surmise that Chokan had been recalled from Chernyaev's detachment under special order. China wasn't far from here. There were political upheavals there at the time. He didn't just marry Aysara, he also wanted to continue working. Perhaps his marriage, equally as his death, was a screening operation. There is a grain of reason in this version. After all, why would a brilliant officer born into Tore clan and the sweetheart of women marry a homely Aysara, the sister of Tezek, with whom Valikhanov had a tense relationship? But his village was situated not far from the Chinese border. He had a broad agent network. He sent them over the borderline, they would sniff out the situation on the ground over there and came back. Chokan used to record everything, put in an envelope and sent out. He was a resident in Altyn-Emel. On the 20th of November 1864, Chokan Valikhanov wrote to Kolpakovsky about his serious negotiations with the Chinese, who came from Kulja, and that so far he hadn't had any news from his aide Bektair, who had been posted to eastern Turkestan for intelligence gathering. Thereby informing Your Excellency, I ask you, if at all possible, to lend a formal guise to my agency, so that I can be a useful servant of yours. This means that before this happened, he had been working out of Tezek at his own risk and peril. If one bears in mind that Chokan Valikhanov often carried out secret orders, then why can't one presume that he had been sent out to Kulja to conduct a new secret mission? So how and where he died remains unknown. It's noteworthy that no one from Valikhanov's close friends potentially in on classified information hadn't visited his tomb for a long time. This led the researchers to assume that Chokan had been alive then. Then who is buried here? Or maybe this is not a grave at all. However, some say that in the 1950s the grave was researched. Scientists came from Russia and Kazakhstan to exhume the remains. They carried the remains to Leningrad, and there they proved that the remains belonged to Chokan Valikhanov. However, if these research efforts had indeed been carried out, they were not made widely public, and surely no DNA tests were available at that time. Chapter 3. After all, it is a murder. The most popular version is that Valikhanov was killed, but by who? There are conflicting views on this. There are quite a few versions of Chokan's death. Some resources say that he'd been poisoned by haters, but proof is necessary to bear it out. A lot of people could be envious of him. Among them, first of all, would be his closed ones. For instance, his half-cousin Gazi Valikhanov and the brother of his wife Tezek. Tezek saw a rival in Chokan who undermined his influence in the village. Tezek was an agent of the Tsarist secret service and even had a military rank. Chokan would always have conflicts with him. Chokan wanted to displace Tezek and rob him of power. He revealed Tezek's criminal links with Gazi. Later on, they were condemned and discharged from office. There was an assassination attempt on Chokan Valikhanov. The attempt was carried out in Kyakhta when he visited Dostoevsky. They were at home and a shot was directed at him and fired into the window. There were a few other versions. The infighting between counterintelligence services of Russia and England often led to deaths among residents. Literally a few years before and a few years after, there was a string of mysterious deaths. One of them was the death of Jan Vitkevich. He was found in a hotel with a shot to his head. His papers had been burned down and stolen. Or Ivan Kirillov, the disciple of Grigory Karelin, died suddenly on the way to Petersburg. Karelin's diaries disappeared. After Valikhanov's death, none of the papers or records made in the last months of his life were found. There was a strange circumstance in this connection. He liked writing a lot. In fact, Valikhanov's relatives Gazi and Tezek were accused of secret relations with Kashgar's ruler Yakub Bek, who was supposed to be a rival by the English. Researchers don't rule out that Gazi could have been an accomplice in the disappearance of Chokan's records. There's an interesting detail. Gazi was a first lieutenant and was outwardly just like him. He emulated Chokan on purpose. Perhaps this has something to do with the intelligence officer's death. Among the ordering customers, there were also Chinese and Kochen authorities. Some internal intrigues between Russian departments were also mentioned, hinting that Valikhanov must have been the victim of some underhand fights. Many think that the performer was Valikhanov's servant, known as Seyful Mulukov, who was allegedly attached to him on purpose. This man bores me to death, but I by no means can get him off my back. He follows me everywhere I go. His mere presence tortures me and enrages me. Is the servant really a problem? If he was a nuisance, why not just get rid of him? And then, if Chokan was killed, then how did this happen? It's not likely that he was shot. He could have been poisoned or strangled. There were yurts around and nothing else. Chokan was found dead the following morning, and Seyful Mulukov vanished after that. He was nowhere to be found. This is an enmeshed story. However, these are just versions. This is where it shot out and came out of the front part. This is almost a mystery. In the 1990s, Valikhanov's statue wasn't collapsing but definitely required some repairs. Money wasn't being allocated because the time was difficult. The lightning struck from behind, and these four cupolas didn't fall to pieces but kept together. We had to take a photo and send it to the region. There they got convinced that it needed refurbishment. In other words, he obtained some funding for himself. Traces of the lightning haven't been removed during refurbishment. They were left as they were. Endowed from above when alive, he has remained the select one even after his death. He's the one who took a step that separates ordinary people from those who become immortal.